Welcome to Comicstorian, a product of Eligible Monster. Now you're probably wondering, what is Comicstorian? Well, Zonical and I are huge comic book fans, and we wanted to start bringing you lots of comic book content, because some people are just like us. We're hoping that you'll become just as big a video comic nerd as we are. So welcome to Comicstorian, and I hope to see you around for a very long time. Make sure you subscribe, like, and favorite.
What's up, freaks, geeks, gals, and ghouls? I am Toxic J, right here for Corpses for Conversation, where we talk about the good, the bad, and the straight-up geeky. Sad news in the world of the comic book community. We lost a very near and dear YouTuber, and I don't really say that as much, because I don't really like or care for YouTubers, but this one I did. We lost Ben Potter, who, if you're not too familiar with, he ran a page called Comicstorian. If you were on the go and you couldn't sit down to read, this dude he got your back. He did a lot of content for a lot of books that I was struggling to read, only because like time purposes and all that other stuff. But before we get into that, I like to reintroduce, he's back from the dead, Evil Ed. How we doing, Evil?
I'm back, and I'm better than ever. Got a knack for making things better. Face facts, 'cause your opinion don't matter. It's a maniac.
I'm back and better than ever. Good to be back. Missed this. Hello, all freaks and geeks out there. Evil Dead's here to carry on and help out Toxic J with this unfortunately sensitive subject. You know, rest in peace, Ben Potter. Our condolences to his wife. It's very unfortunate news, but one thing we can do is just keep talking about comic books, because that's exactly what Mr. Potter would have wanted.
Me and you, people that don't know, me and Evil Ed are actual friends. We hung out, but we also talk smack. He is on my level when it comes to comic books. Ed knows his stuff. When there's something he doesn't like or discuss, I take it into consideration, only the fact because he's read comic books just as long as I have. Now, what I want to ask you, I remember you told me this a while ago, like, how did you get introduced into the world of comic books?
Myself personally, the way I got introduced to comic books is really thank you to my dad. My childhood wasn't a traditional Latino childhood at most. I did grow up in a gang affiliated world. My parents were gang affiliated, but in order to distract me from all that, my dad raised a huge geek, man. He just, any opportunity he had, and it was two things for him. Number one, it was a distraction to all that activity. Number two, it's a good way for your kids to read. It really is. That's what really introduced me. You know, we didn't really have a lot of comic book stores around my neighborhood. So my dad, whenever he had the opportunity and there were comic books around for sale or anything, he would always buy me a stack and he would always have me read them. You know, that's what just really opened that rabbit hole for me. Just, I wanted more. I needed to know more about these characters and read these stories, and really got me into drawing as well. And I just grew obsessed ever since. So it's really shout out to my dad.
It is a good way to read, or start if you're learning how to read. I remember like how I got introduced into comic books was actually the same thing, was through my dad. He was like a big kid too. So every time he would have comic books, I would kind of sneak and look at it. But see, I didn't know like the value or how to take care of them. He would get mad at me. One day he was like, you know what? I'm tired of you messing up my books. I'm going to take you to go get your own. Oh, okay. I think it was like about maybe 7 or 8. And I remember the first ever comic book I ever bought for myself. I don't know the exact number. It was a Wolverine comic book. I think it took place in 89, 90. He kind of looked like Weapon X. It was just him in his Jungle Man underwear going through the Amazon jungles fighting the Tyrannosaurus Rex. But he also went up against Apocalypse. Now, this was predate the X-Men, the animated series. So you know how, Ed, remember in the series, Apocalypse was like this huge hulking monster? Well, in the book, he was very tall, but he was very thin. In Wolverine, I remember in each panel, when he was basically wailing on his face, either with his fist or he was just clawing him to death, you see bits and pieces of his face slowly deteriorating from just the impact of the punches. That was my introduction to comic books, and I've been a fan ever since, and I'm fortunate to actually pass that down to my daughter, who does like comic book characters and stuff. My question, one of many questions to you, Zom, where do you think in 2024 the state of how comic books or comic book readers to obviously, the comic book movies? What's your take on everything?
Well, first off, Zom isn't here. Shout out to Zom, though.
And Dimebag and SoCal.
You just called me Zom.
Did I call you Zom? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you did.
Okay, well, I'm so used to it.
It's all good. I haven't been here for a while. But the state of the comic book world right now is, to me, really heartbreaking. Because there's so many comic book content out there when it comes to television and movies and within animation and even live action. But the unfortunate part is people do not see that as a gateway to read the books. And that's what really breaks my heart. When it comes to me, a little backstory of how Toxic J and I became friends. We worked at the same establishment for a while, knew of each other, but once we started hearing little talks that, hey, that guy's in the comic books. Hey, so is that guy? It's really one of those stepbrothers moments.
What? Did we just become best friends? Yup.
You start questioning each other. It's like, yo, did we just become best friends? Yup.
Yeah, exactly.
It's that exact moment because you're testing each other's knowledge, and it's that. But nowadays, when people talk to me about, obviously, Marvel's a huge thing, the MCU is a big thing, and they see I have a giant Spider-Man tattoo on me, people automatically just assume I'm a big Marvel guy, and it's always MCU-based questions, and I get the basic question of them all, it's Marvel or DC. And every time I say my answer, which is always DC over Marvel, it's always, well, their movies suck. That's what breaks my heart. It's automatically, if that question's asked, you just know they're not talking about comic books. It's so unfortunate because there's so many great stories out there that everyone can be reading, but they don't read. If you like the movies and the TV shows, why not take an interest in the comic books? Because what's even worse is 2 of my local comic book stores closed down recently. That too is a struggle for a comic book guy. There's not too many, especially around my neighborhood. It's horrible. It sucks. You have millions and millions of people who go out to the movie theaters on opening night spending a lot of money for a movie ticket and concessions when they can spend less than $5 to just go walk to your local comic book store, support your local comic book store, and just buy a book for around $5 and read about these characters that you enjoy. It's also sadness, like right now we have Deadpool and Wolverine coming out very soon, and the latest trailer just teased Lady Deadpool. If you're a huge comic book fan, if you know Deadpool, you know of Lady Deadpool and her being an alternate Wade Wilson. Well, her name is Wanda Wilson. Now you're going to have these out of nowhere females cosplaying as Lady Deadpool, acting like they knew of this character for many years, and it's just, okay, you watch Deadpool Wolverine, but did you pick up a book? And I know you have the same feelings, Toxic J. So
of course I do. Now, do you think it's also because we grew up kind of like in the same era? You know me, even back when you were doing frequent episodes, and it's the Gen Z era. They're spoiled with all these Marvel movies, all these DC movies. They have the right to judge what they like and what they don't like. Back then, we didn't. We had comic book movies few and far between. Hollywood studios didn't want to touch any of that stuff because they thought it was too childish or it wouldn't make any money. What were some of your favorite comic book movies growing up?
You put it perfectly. It's not like we were spoiled. We took whatever we got. And I remember growing up in the 90s. Let me get the big ones out the way. Yes, I grew up with the Richard Donner Superman films. I grew up with the Tim Burton and Schumacher films. But let me bring up the lesser known ones that a lot of people don't really talk about. I also grew up, and I have a soft spot for the 1990 Captain America film.
I do too, and that movie got so much hate, but back then, I was happy to have it. I thought the portrayal of the Red Skull, and how his face was kind of a bit melted off, I liked that portrayal and how he looked. And even how the Red Skull actually met his demise was kind of just messed up,
There's also that. There's the, I just had it right now. The Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Nick Fury movie with David Hasselhoff.
And I remember you telling me that a while ago, like, look, not a lot of people in this era are going to know. They're going to just always think of Nick Fury and Samuel L. Jackson. No, he was not the first Nick Fury. It was the Hoff himself.
Samuel L. Jackson is the perfect Nick Fury, but the role almost went to someone else, the Hoff. David Hasselhoff played the super spy back in 1998 and was supposed to remain in the role for 5 more films. That's right, Mr. Baywatch himself was almost the father of our Avengers.
The Hoffman, and rumor has it he's gonna do a cameo as Nick Fury in Deadpool Wolverine, which I'm really looking forward to. But it's a sadder moment when it's gonna go over a lot of people's heads. The fact that he's the original Nick Fury.
Exactly. And speaking of original, I would probably crap my pants. I'm not going to even lie. I don't even think they thought that far. It would be so interesting to see an older version of Dolph Lundgren's Frank Castle's Punisher in the film.
Come on, God. Answer me. For years I'm asking you why. Why are the innocent dead and the guilty alive? Where is justice? Where is punishment? Or have you already answered? Have you already said to the world, here is justice, here is punishment, here in me?
I believe it came out in maybe 89 or 90. I'm not too sure about that. I can always look it up later. But yeah, Dolph Lundgren did play the first on-screen portrayal of the Punisher. It was a direct-to-video release. I remember growing up watching it on Channel 5 when Channel 5 would actually show movies, how the voiceover guy was hyping it up. I love the Punisher growing up. I did, and I have a soft spot for Todd McFarlane's Spawn that came out in 97, and people made fun of that movie. And I know you liked it because John Leguizamo and the Latino community and everything.
Yep. So you want to do it the hard way? I warned you. I'm just gonna have to teach you a lesson. No more clowning around. I'm not the vindicator, or the victimizer, or the vaporizer, or the mind vader. I'm the violator!
I like that, and I'm trying to think of what other comic book movies. Yeah, Richard.
I got some more in the chamber. There's also another 1997 film. It was straight to television, Justice League of America. It was one of the first live-action adaptations of DC. It was a horrible roster. They weren't allowed to use Wonder Woman. They weren't allowed to use Superman or Batman. They weren't allowed to use the Holy Trinity. But it did have the Atom. It did have Green Lantern. It did have the Flash. And if you're a horror fan, which I know the Corpses of Conversation fans are, the Atom, Ray Palmer, is portrayed by John Kassir, aka the Crypt Keeper.
Hello, kiddies. It's your old pal, John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper. And you're listening to Corpses for Conversation. Be careful what you ask for. You may get it.
I don't remember that. I don't remember that.
You don't remember this one?
No.
It's so bad. But it's one of those so bad, so good.
So, do you remember, I think it was maybe 96. No, wait, probably 92. Somewhere around that time. 92 to 96. Fox had their own version of the X-Men movie, and it was the same thing.
Yes,
it was
the New Generation.
Yes.
I think it was called.
I don't think they were allowed to use X-Men, the word X-Men, so they changed it to I was hyped for that as well. And then when I saw it, I'm like, this movie's dope. And I was waiting for a sequel. Obviously, that never happened.
There's another one. Shout out to New Generation because, again, it's exactly what we said earlier. We just took whatever we had. It's like, oh, man, there's a comic book based thing. I'm watching it. I love it. I'm a huge Spider-Man fan. I love Spider-Man. Everyone always brings up Tom Holland, Andrew Garfield,
I know you're
Tobey
going with
Maguire.
this. Yeah.
They weren't the originals American-wise. There was a 1970s Spider-Man series.
We also got to remember, I believe it was in 95. Once again, I'm not 100% sure. Billy Zane as the Phantom.
He has been a symbol of justice for centuries. Yet he is as mortal as any man. He has been known as the ghost who walks, the guardian of the dark, or simply the Phantom.
That is a guilty pleasure of mine. It is one of those movies that are so bad, but it's so good. You know,
I love the Phantom. Billy Zane's the GOAT.
I have that on VHS. Like, I bought it like maybe about 2 months ago, and I was like, oh my god, I forgot how much I enjoyed this movie.
I'm obsessed with that franchise. I love the Phantom.
I hope they do a re-imaging of the Phantom.
They tried. I don't know if you remember this. Back in the early, I want to say 2000s, late 2000s, Sci-Fi tried a reboot with the Phantom, and it was like a made-for-TV movie. It was supposed to be like a little pilot to a series, but it didn't really pan out. And it was supposed to be canon to the Billy Zane film. And they even showed off the original costume, and the new Phantom was supposed to be the son of Billy Zane's version of the Phantom. Yeah, it did not.
It never picked up.
It didn't pan out.
But
I got the name now. Nicholas Hammond was the OG Spider-Man. It's because it goes even further. Nicholas Hammond was the first American live-action Spider-Man, but the second in general live-action Spider-Man, because there was a Super Sentai Henshin Spider-Man series back in the day. It wasn't Peter Parker, it was his own little adaptation, but it was Spider-Man. He had a Megazord. It was Power Ranger-esque. Crazy enough, it inspired Power Rangers to have the whole Megazord thing.
So wait, Spider-Man at one point out there had a Megazord?
Yes.
That's crazy, dude. I didn't know that.
He had a Megazord.
I mean, you would know that because you're the Power Ranger nut here, so.
Oh yeah, it did. It was a deal. A lot of people know this. Stan Lee originally tried to do Power Rangers here in the States. What? So he made a deal with what was that studio? Toei? I can't remember. I think it was Toei.
Toho does Godzilla films.
Toei Productions were handling Super Sentai, and he made a deal with them. Stan Lee. He said, all right, I'll give you the rights to Spider-Man, but you give me the rights to this Super Sentai series, I could bring it to America. So they did a Super Sentai Power Ranger-esque Spider-Man series, but they only have the rights to the Spider-Man look. They didn't have the rights to use, the villains. But in order to sell toys, they decided, well, let's give Spider-Man a giant robot. And it panned out. It worked. But
so they kind of had to just basically deal with the cards that were dealt to them, kind of.
Exactly.
In a situation.
I mean, it worked out because next thing you know it, the Super Sentai series saw how successful the Megazord toys were selling for that Spider-Man series, and decided, hey, you know what? Let's bring that over to Super Sentai, aka Power Rangers, and do that there. So if it wasn't for Spider-Man, there'd be no Megazords.
And so I remember watching, like, it was reruns. Obviously, by the time I watched the Spider-Man series from the 70s, it was already canceled. I mean, obviously, looking back now, it was cheesy for what it was. But growing up, you're just like, oh my god, that's Spider-Man on film, on TV. And I do like the little subtlety mistakes, I don't want to call. So when he would shoot a web, he would act like it, and all of a sudden it cuts to a scene and it just appears, Yeah.
So it's like they use the same stock footage every time he shoots a web. I want to bring up another 1970s show that, to me, it's the template of what the Incredible Hulk should be, and that's the Incredible Hulk.
Oh yeah, with
Lou Ferrigno. Again, growing up with reruns, and the show was a syndication. It wasn't an action-packed film, and here and there will be like a super villain for the Hulk to fight, and it was one of the first times you saw some Marvel crossovers. This show also had like one of the first live-action adaptations of Thor and Daredevil and the Kingpin. That stuff, we're so spoiled now with the Avengers. It's when you saw that as a kid, and mine, Toxic J's an 80s baby, I'm a 90s baby, this is a 70s show, we grew up on the reruns. But anytime these TV shows popped up, best believe we're not surfing anymore. We're not changing the channel. It's staying here. I'm watching the Incredible Hulk. I'm watching David Banner going through some tough things. It's this generation is so spoiled. We took everything that we can get, the good, the bad, the ugly. It did not matter. The key thing to all this, though, is even though we were watching all these cheap production TV shows and movies, it led to one thing. I gotta go get some comic books. I gotta get more comic books.
It gives you that itch.
Yeah, it gives you that itch. I want more. Like, especially since we grew up in a generation where we didn't have a lot. We didn't have a lot of TV shows and movies. So if you wanted to know more about these characters and get more about their lore, yes, let me go get some comic books. I want to read more about the Incredible Hulk of Spider-Man. I want to read more about Spawn. you know, especially stuff outside of Marvel and DC. And that's one of the biggest issues I have about this generation too. It's Marvel and DC. Marvel and DC. Those two are the big guys always, but there's so much more than them.
You know, you got Dark Horse Comics, Image Comics,
Studios, Valiant, IDW, Dynamite.
IDW makes great series. They, you know, they handle the Ninja Turtles series, which is
Ninja
great.
Turtle stuff is fantastic.
You know,
Last
like
Ronin,
and now that we're gonna get a live action,
we're getting a live action adaptation of Last Ronin. Absolutely.
And you know, me and Evil Ed would constantly send back stuff on Instagram, and it's funny because I think that was one of the things that we sent at the exact same time to each other. They wanted I forget her name, the original actress that played April O'Neil, the writer,
the original 1990s film.
They want her back in The Last Ronin, and it goes back to Ben Potter. And now, like, as we get older, life happens. I'm married, I have 2 kids. Ed works full-time, and like he had said earlier, he doesn't have any comic book store, so it's kind of hard. I know you live in downtown, so like you're not gonna come all the way over near my neighborhood for a comic book. That's ridiculous. But here's where Ben Potter comes in and his YouTube series, Comicstorian. I didn't have time to read The Last Ronin. I caught it later. I did watch his video on it, and I think it was like an hour. And I sat there and watched, and the way he portrayed all these characters, the voiceovers, it was him, but he changed up the voice and it didn't just all sound the same. You could tell he was so passionate about just comic books in general. And that's how I feel, and that's how Ed feels. You know, and I know to an extent Zomb as well. It is heartbreaking that we've lost someone in the comic book community, and like you had said earlier, Ed, it's horrible, but it is a small community compared to everything else that's out there today.
Oh, absolutely. You know, it's exactly that. You're on point. Well, I don't go out to comic book stores as much, so if like there's a story I just really need to know, best believe I'm going to Comicstorian and hoping he uploaded something.
9 times out of 10,
he did.
Whatever you're looking for, he done already.
Probably already did it, and it's like, okay, cool, he's there. And you know, and obviously you have certain people on YouTube who review comic books, but the fact that he wasn't just reviewing the books, he was reading them out to you so you can know the story. And again, it's like what you just said, he's, you know, changing his voice to be certain characters, and he makes it so entertaining to a point where you can be watching a 40-minute long or a 50-minute long episode of his, and you're not even noticing the time passing by because you're invested in the story and the way he reads it. You know, there will be no other like him to do such a thing, especially since he's been on YouTube for a very long time and taking a 10 years, taking a risk on a community that's not that big. Yes, Marvel is a huge thing right now. DC's a big thing right now, but when it comes to the actual comic book community for these characters, like Dr. J mentioned, he did Ninja Turtle stuff. He did Power Ranger stuff too on his channel. He did certain characters that weren't very popular, which is fantastic. That's a true comic book fan. He didn't just stick with the basics of Spider-Man and Superman and Batman. It's like, no, let me try to get as much content out there as possible. Just shout out to him. He'll be very missed because that's just something that we need, something to share his content of how important comic books are, because the more they disappear, it really hurts because it's not like they're expensive. And I know a lot of people like to say that comic books are no longer relevant, I guess, but if you look at books in general, do you see Barnes & Noble going out of business or going bankrupt? No, they're not. They're still doing very well for themselves. We can do the same for comic books as long as we support them. If you're willing to buy a ticket for like $20 to see an opening of your upcoming Avengers film, why not spend $4 or $5 on an Avengers comic, you know? Hope people can really go out there and start supporting your stores, because again, it breaks my heart when I see my local stores close down and I can't even go out shop, because I hate buying comic books online. They're fragile. I don't want any bets on my books. It's a paranoia for me.
So do you think the comic books or comic, you know, like the physical part of it, it's kind of like physical media, like Blu-ray, you know, DVD, even Laserdisc and VHS. Do you kind of think they're all in the same realm where they're just fading away in this day and age?
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. You know, people, because I know Toxic J and myself, this is something we also have in common. To this day, we buy DVDs, we buy Blu-rays, we buy VHSs. For me, it's like, I'm still going to buy comic books. Yes, you can download certain apps to have your comic books digitally, but it's like
honestly, that shit is so confusing. So,
I don't like it. You know, it's the best way to say it. It's like a boob.
What did he say?
Sure, I could stare at a picture of a boob, but I'd rather have it in my hand, you know?
Exactly. That's a good analogy, actually. You know, I want to feel something, and not physically in my hand, but I think it's a little more emotional.
Nostalgic. It brings back to you.
Especially when you have it in your hand. It's just there are times, and I'm pretty sure you feel the same way. You're so sucked into a story, each turn of the page, instead of swiping like on an app or anything. I've gotten emotional reading certain things.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like for me, there's also another thing. I don't know if you do this, Toxic J, but I'm a little bit weird when I buy a fresh new comic book.
Well, you're weird in general.
Exactly. I like to smell them.
What the fuck?
No, I do too. You do
too? It's like you open that and just sniff it. There's something about a freshly print comic book that just smells fantastic. And I can't get that with a tablet.
No, exactly. This is how I feel. So, you know, people buy different variants of comic books, and that's fine. That's their prerogative. But me, I don't, you know, I hear people saying, oh, save them. They might be worth something someday. You know what? Honestly, maybe, but I don't care. I just want to purchase it to read the story. If it's something worth down the line, I'm cool with that. But, you know, in the end, I don't care. I do own the death and the rebirth of Superman, and I own the Nightfall Batman where Bane breaks his back. I still have those, and they're really great condition. I didn't buy them for the value. I bought them because of the stories. I'm pretty sure you read The Death of Superman, and, you know, all those panels were just basically one big, like, fist fight. You know, I'm a Batman guy to the end, but when I read that as a kid, and even to this date, it made me appreciate what Superman was or is as a person and what he's doing. You know, he's like the Marvel version of Captain America, but if not, to me, he's better. And he's one of the first major technical characters came out in the 30s, like before Batman.
For me, I'm kind of on both sides. Where if I buy a comic book, I'm going to open it, I'm going to read it, because I see a lot of people nowadays who are part of the comic book community go out and grade their books, but then that means you would have to buy at least more than one copy. And especially with this generation, knowing it's such a small community, sometimes that could be an hassle. Especially if you go out to your local comic book store and you know those comic book stores have like loyal customers. It's like you want to buy 2 issues of one copy of an issue so you can grade one, keep one safe. I do that sometimes. Let me buy 2 so I can keep one safe because this might cost me money. Because sure, sometimes I look up some of my issues and realize, holy crap, this one's worth a few $100s. But I'm not going to grade it and put it in a case because I want to read it here from time to time again. And I'm not going to pay a scalper price, especially for my stuff from the 90s and 80s and 70s, just to have a second issue. I'm not doing all that. It's a bit of a struggle because I want to do both. I want to keep certain stuff safe because the only ones I do not touch is I have certain comic books that are autographed. Those I don't touch anymore. So if I have them autographed, I don't want to touch them. I do my best to keep them in nice sealed cases, keep my comic books safe and crisp. But other than that, I'm messing with them. I'm reading them.
I think the only time I've ever actually gone out of my way to buy multiple copies of a comic book was actually the first issue of Marvel's version of Predator. You can look at the back catalog, Corpses for Conversation. Evil Ed is actually on the Predathon episodes, so go check those out. Now, I'm a huge Predator fan, or a Yelcha. I think there was maybe 7 variant issues, and I had to track them down and get them. I didn't do that with issue 2 or anything. I just wanted the first issue. Well, they were something, I don't know. I do remember, they had, I think, an 8th one that was like $50. Now, I'm not going to spend $50 for something I have 7 copies of, For the most part, I just wanted to read them, And like I said, even if I didn't have time, I would always go to Ben, Comicstorian. And it really sucks. Comicstorian and Eris Quinones. His last name is Quinones, right? I believe so.
Eris Quinones. Yeah,
those were always my go-to guys. Now, I know you had posted something earlier. I wasn't really paying attention only because I was doing something at work, but after I was finished, he even posted some on his Instagram account, and I went back to yours. I'm like, wait, no, I was kind of like, no, this can't be. And I look back and I'm like, holy crap. Yes, he was a YouTuber, but he did so much more. And even some comic book writers in the community are sending their condolences. This is how big this guy was. He did it all for the love of the book. Before there were movies or shows, there was comic books. And it is very sad that this happened, and we don't know the details of it. But we know that it was an accident. To what extent it was, I don't know. Hopefully in the weeks and months coming, we could find out. But it was very tragic.
One thing I want to bring up about Comicstorian is his last video, which he posted just a few days ago. And his last video, I know, Dr. J, I don't know if you saw it. It's something that you and I have been saying for a long time. And it's why DC reboots beat Marvel. Even a true comic book fan, he knows DC is better than Marvel. Seeing that side, it's like, okay, cool, because he's not going to be the, let me just go with the cool trends. Everybody likes Marvel, so let me just up on some Marvel. It's like, no, this is why DC's better, so let me do a video about it. Man, he always stuck to his guns, always stuck to his opinions. Even if you go to his comic sections, you can see him interact with his fans and his followers. So he will be greatly missed. It just truly sucks because this is a community I don't want to lose. It's a community that I feel like needs to grow. So it's so great that, you know, you asked me to hop on here so we can talk about this subject, because comic books are very important. You know, without these books, this generation wouldn't have these movies or TV shows that you're so spoiled with. Back in the day, we had to wait for these things to come out. And not only wait, we didn't have the internet either. So we couldn't go online to look at these trailers and stuff like that. You had to go out to the movie theater and get a ticket for a movie just to sit there and hope they play that trailer.
So I remember when Tim Burton's Batman,
that's one of the big ones that people just went out just for the trailer.
And they dropped the trailer in movie theaters. And then whatever movie it was, and they found out, they just wanted to see the trailer. But that's the extent how people had to do back then. And I'm not ragging on this generation's comic. There are some, what do we call them? We call them the normies. The normies don't want to do that. If there's something that interests you and you're like, hey, you know what? I want to go and look and check this out. Is this true or not? And like me being a comic nerd and you being a comic nerd, when we go to a comic book movie, it's not, correct me if I'm wrong, Ed, it's not we go to see the story. It's more or less, nope, that's not accurate. Nope, that's not accurate either. Hey, why is that there? That should be in, you know, like, it's not, we're trying to tear the thing down. It's just, it's in our nature. We grew up with it.
It is. And I have to admit that I try not to do that as much anymore because I've done my best to have the realization of whether you like this or not, whether you're a big comic book fan or not, comic book movies are not made for comic book fans. They're just not. That's a fact. It's not my opinion. Because if these studios really relied to make these movies and TV shows 100% accurate and solely only market to the comic book fans, honestly, they wouldn't be making up to $1 billion. They wouldn't. I think one of the best examples of how crazy comic books are compared to, because sometimes changes are good. For example, in the comic books, do you recall how Jason Todd was resurrected?
Oh man, honestly, it's been a while. Like I said, like I've read so many books, and you think I would know this? It's just,
but
it's
it
been a
happens.
minute.
It's like you get shuffled because you read too much. But let me tell the audience real quick. I'm not gonna get into too much detail. It's a rabbit hole. But the way Jason Todd came back to life, and for those who don't know who Jason Todd is, he is the second Robin after Dick Grayson got older and became Nightwing. Batman took in another Robin. His name was Jason Todd, and Jason Todd died in one of the most famous comic book stories of all time, A Death in the Family.
Which were actually voted by the fans to kill him off.
Which was voted by the fans to kill off Jason, because Jason was annoying.
Oh, you bastard!
Jason was resurrected, and he became one of the most badass characters called Red Hood. But the way he was resurrected in the comics was Superboy Prime, which I'm not going to get into who that character is, punched the universe so hard that Jason came back to life.
That's some deep shit, you know?
Explain that to a normie.
They're going to just fluster you with questions. Well, that's stupid. Oh, why did, you know?
You know, I get it, but when you watch the great animated film, which DC does amazing in animation, Under the Red Hood, Jason was brought back by the Lazarus Pit, which makes total sense in the Batman lore, and it worked. Even in animation, you can't fully adapt a comic book 100% because you're going to get people so lost. I do my best not to do what Toxic J said, is I go into a comic book movie and just go, well, that's not accurate, or man, I get they're trying to adapt this story, but the story's so much better. It sucks. You know, you have to admit these movies and TV shows are not meant for guys like me and Toxic J, because if they were, you'd be losing a shit ton of money, honestly.
Well, before we wrap this up, it's like, it's few and far between. Now, I always get a lot of hate for this. I thought all 4 Avenger movies were like garbage. I could not get through them. The first one bored the shit out of me. Second one, I did like Ultron. I think that the third one, Infinity War, I'm like, no, it's not Infinity War. It's Infinity Gauntlet. But I get it. It doesn't roll off the tongue when trying to market it. And then when DC Studios tried to do the Justice League, everyone can just do their research on that. I won't get too into that. But their first version of Justice League was, as much as I tried to defend it, it was pretty bad. But when was it? Like 2 years later? I think they
yeah,
released.
because I want to say the Josh Whedon version came out 2017, and then Snyder's version, I want to say it was finally released in 2021.
Okay, I know it was kind of somewhere near the pandemic, but there's a big difference. That movie is 4 hours long, and it is so beautifully done. Like Zack Snyder's version compared to Josh, it's night and day. In the end, it's all about based on comic books. Now, whether you want to physically read it or just watch the movies, that's okay. You know, but me and Ed here, we like to read the source material before we go into a movie. So as we actually close this episode, thank you once again, Ed, for getting... I mean, last time we heard from you, I know you got sucked into a portal fighting a bunch of Deadites. So I'm glad you were able to find your way back here on Earth, and at least in the present day and not in the past. So,
can't keep the king down, man.
You know, and I hope
right.
And I hope you come back on to talk more comic talks, and you know, hopefully, we want to review comic books. We're just a small podcast, and we appreciate everyone that gives us the time and day to listen to us, whether it's on Spotify or on YouTube. We will try to carry on and pay respects to Ben Potter. I wish his family the best, and I know it is a difficult time, but he left a legacy, and I know that wasn't his intention. He just wanted to put out good stuff for people like us and maybe bring in new viewers and interest into the hobby.
Yep. Thank you guys for having me back. And absolutely, as Dr. J just said, you know, we'll dedicate this episode to Ben Potter, you know, dedicated to his wife. Again, our condolences, because he was very important to this generation of the comic book community. There will be no other like him for what he's done.
After all is said and done, this episode does come to a close. I am Toxic J, along with
Evil Ed here.
And why don't you make like a tree and get out of here? And you know what? Why don't you go read some comic books?